So, welcome to the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series, where we engage bold thinkers and transformative educators in conversations that matter. And today's guest is a special guest, actually joining this podcast for the second time, but this time for a much more focused discussion on changing assessment. I'm talking about Conrad Hughes. Conrad Hughes is the director general of the International School of Geneva, where he teaches theory and knowledge. He's a professor of practice at Durham University and a senior fellow at UNESCO's International Bureau of Education. Conrad has published 4 major books on education, including Education and Elitism, Challenges and Opportunities, Routledge 2021. In October, he will take up the role of head of school at the International School of Los Angeles. In his latest book, which we will discuss today, Changing Assessment, How to Design Curriculum for Human Flourishing, Brill 2025, he explores the thorny issue of assessment reform. Since the Delors Report, education reformers have worked to create curricula that allow human beings to flourish. Schools, according to Conrad, should not only be places where we learn to be and learn to live together, but also places where assessment practices valorize the diverse range of human gifts within each learner. And yet, most schools remain locked in a 19th century assessment structure that prevents young people from exploring the full variety and extent of their talents, forcing them to perform on a narrow, high-stakes track. When will this change? Well, Conrad, very welcome to the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series. It's a pleasure to welcome you on the show.
Hi, Emiliano. It's great to be back.
Great pleasure to see you, and I really appreciate this book of yours, Changing Assessment. Of course, I do appreciate all your publications. And in preparing for this video interview, I was really impressed about the content of the book, Changing Assessment. There are several areas that are of interest, but before I get into specific questions, I want you to briefly illustrate to our audience the reason why you felt that it was important for you to write this book at this specific time, where we live in a very, I would say, super complex society, politically, sociologically, linguistically, and also in terms of international conflicts, potentially bringing us in World War III.
I think that the concept that really articulates the problem, the problem proposition, if you like, it's curriculum relevance. To what extent is the curriculum really preparing young people for the world as it is today? And to illustrate that, I'm in a very unique and I feel very blessed position to be at once a head of school and a teacher, but also a researcher in education. And straddling those two worlds, you sense the disconnect. You'll go to a conference where we're talking about the futures of education. You'll be in a think tank where we're exploring 21st century competences. You'll be involved in a publication on education for peace. You'll be doing research on developing creativity, innovation, and future fitness in the mind. And then you go back to school, even the school you're running, and you walk through the corridors. And when you're in the primary section, there's a lot of great learning going on, a lot of excitement, a lot of creativity, a lot of sharing, a lot of interpersonal competence development, a lot of joy. But as you move up towards the senior lessons. You can walk past classrooms where there's a vibrant intellectual discussion happening or a very high-powered presentation, and I love those moments. But very often, especially if it's sort of from about February towards June, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it's about exam preparation. And it's with me as if it happened yesterday. I can remember walking past the class and they were discussing English literature. And the teacher had asked the class a question, and the student had responded. And the teacher said, "What does it say on the mark scheme?" And it just dawned to me there that certainly from a student's perspective, because they have to leave high school with credentials, with grades, with certification, they're jumping through hoops that have been created by the assessment model. And it's actually the tail wagging the dog. And that's where that lack of curriculum relevance is there. We're teaching to the test, we're learning to the test. Typically, senior classrooms will be about going through mark schemes, examiner notes, understanding what the rater wants from you, understanding how you can play the game, how you can get the best score, which is not really learning. And it's certainly not learning deep 21st century competencies. And I thought, wow, this has to change. Our education model is on this score, maybe not everywhere, but certainly on this score, it's fundamentally wrong.
Okay. Human intelligence is not a single narrow construct. The assessment system, and I'm reading notes from your very interesting book, the assessment system should be formative, that is, designed to help learning. Individuals invest in education if the benefits in the form of increased earnings over their lifetime exceeds the cost. Graduates aim for certificates and diplomas because these tell employers that the graduates are worthwhile investment. They are showing the world what they have done rather than investing in their potential to do more. Of course, you're discussing this critically. So the first question, now that you share with our audience the core reason for writing this book, at least in general terms, because it will take a long time to discuss all your reasons, I'm confident. You argue that the core issue, and if I understood correctly, with school assessment is its narrow focus on academic knowledge and test-taking ability. Teaching to the test, preparing students for the international job market, all themes that you and I discussed in several publications. What would a truly holistic, this is my question number one, what would a truly holistic assessment system look like, and how might it better serve diverse learners, considering again the complexity of the societies we live in currently?
Okay, so
Difficult,
at the
tough one. This is a tough one. I understand. Not easy
no,
to.
I like it. I like it. At the beginning of your question, you were talking about, in quoting the book, intelligence not being a single monolithic construct. And if you look at the theory of intelligence over time, it's broadened, it's widened. So, general intelligence or G intelligence goes back to Binet, Thorndike, Spearman, these fantastic scientists, psychometricians, who fundamentally felt that human intelligence was spatial, mathematico-deductive intelligence. That's about it. Okay. And that's still very much at the core of IQ testing. So that theory of general intelligence, it's stuck with us in the hierarchy of subjects that exists in the minds of many parents and students, and in what we assume an intelligent person is someone who's quite academic, who's fairly strong at a certain way of viewing the world. over time, we've had different theories of intelligence that have really been very interesting. For example, Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence, where he talks about not just intellectual, or if you like, sort of academic intelligence, but also creative intelligence and a kind of social or practical intelligence. And that's a pretty rigorous set of studies that Robert Sternberg did to come up with this triarchic theory. In other words, there are at least three ways of being intelligent. And then, of course, you get to Howard Gardner with his multiple intelligences. He took it up to 11. Increasingly, as we open our minds in the educational world to questions like identity, cultural diversity, I think we're understanding that intelligence is situated as well, geographically, culturally, historically. So it's not a single construct. And to come back to the end of your question, if you like, I think a school with an assessment system that allows as many different intelligences to flourish as possible is what we should be aiming for. And I think that would not only liberate gifts in young people. Some of those gifts aren't recognized today because they're branded as having special educational learning needs, when in fact those learning needs are masking gifts that aren't allowed to flourish in school. Some young people drop out of school because they want to be entrepreneurs, or they want to do something that's away from this rigid academic straitjacket. So already we'd be really nurturing much more potential in young people. But it's even more fundamental than that, because you get to the world of work. And I think that needs to change too. Right now, we're in a very conventional approach to recruitment in general. Not all organizations function the same way, and a lot of startups are actually breaking this model. But it's about your CV, it's about the job description, it's about whether you fit into what the organization is looking for. When maybe what we should be saying is, how can we as an organization become richer because of the interesting, diverse gifts that you can bring us? So that starts at school, and we move away from this industrial model, which is the conveyor belt, into something that is much richer and organic, like an ecosystem. I think will actually change society, the world of work, really fundamentally. And you were talking about World War III. If we're really going to dream, then perhaps an education system like that and a sociological premise which is genuinely based on diversity and inclusion, which means that we recognize gifts that people have, and we're not trying to make them all the same. Maybe it would help create a more peaceful world too, because the way that we approach problems, the way that we look at one another would be different.
Absolutely. And now that we discussed the assessment and its limits, and in relation to what you were just saying right now, I want to discuss a second, at least in my opinion, core theme emerging from your book. And this is very important to me because it also entails how we educate in higher education, and the perspective that, at least in my opinion, an ethically oriented type of university should take, that it's exactly the opposite of what neoliberals would suggest. But this is, again, my opinion. So the second theme, social advantage versus meritocracy. It's a very complex issue. We will see, you mentioned in the book, that it is naive to think that the grading system is entirely meritocratic, as in reality, it describes social advantage as much as raw talent. Perhaps this is not the exact quote, but these are my notes as I was reading, as I said, with interest, your book. Those who do well on school tests tend to come from educated backgrounds in the first place. There are opportunities, at least for those who are particularly determined and motivated to do well. But the entire belief in education as a motor for social renewal through individual, collective, and public flourishing opportunity development cannot only based on meritocracy. So the theme of social advantage versus meritocracy is really complex because it brings in the old discussion about social inequalities. I myself come from a very modest family background, and I had to really work hard to get my degrees, including, of course, my PhD. And so I really understand the struggles that students are undertaking when they want to grow and expand their knowledge. And so this theme of social advantage versus meritocracy is perhaps one of the core and most important theme that I personally want to focus on moving forward. And I was really pleased to read it and explain in this way in your book. But I want to give you the opportunity to further expand because, again, I believe it's core.
Um, yeah, this is something I explore in a lot of detail in the earlier book, Education and Elitism. But of course, they're connected, and the whole question of fairness is key in assessment. Large-scale assessments are highly politicized, and it's around questions of fairness. Um, and the drive to make an assessment fair, which is honorable, can actually lead to skewing the assessment towards reliability, so much so that it becomes a wooden and fairly artificial test of human potential. Um, so, for example, if you want to make sure that everybody has the exact same conditions, uh, then you have to time the assessment so everybody has the same amount of time to do it. You might want, if you want to make sure that the marking is absolutely faultless or as objective as possible, then you actually go to a multiple choice test, and you wind up, with an exacerbation really of the industrial model, with thousands of children cooped up in examination halls in the name of fairness. But in fact, it's equality, not equity, because as you pointed out, the type of knowledge that we're testing, even if you try to sort of broker it down and make it as reliable as possible, favors those who have books at home, whose parents are literate and have higher degrees, who can afford extra tutors, who can afford more expensive schools where maybe, things like class sizes and individual attention are different. So the whole question of meritocracy is tricky. The effort to create a system where every star can shine and every bird can fly, which is a beautiful vision, and that's important to want that. It translates into a system that doesn't necessarily do that. Now, don't forget, I'm not making absolute statements here, because someone who's really driven uh, and someone who wants to change their life through academics and go on to become, maybe a scholar, I believe they can get there if they're placed in the right infrastructure and environment, and the opportunities are there. So that there is opportunity in education, but there can be so much more opportunity if we would just open our minds up a little bit. You walk into a so-called uneducated environment where literacy levels are low, where high school graduation rates are very low. Typically, sub-Saharan Africa is an example where we know that scores are low, literacy rates are low, and end of high school success rates are very low. And yet, of course, this is the youth of the future. 1 in 4 people will be African by 2050. So it's an interesting area to explore. In that environment, you see so much intelligence, so much in the way of human gifts, whether it be intrapersonal, interpersonal, even skills like analysis, which are so often translated into literacy-heavy assessments. You can feel them in conversations, in observations that people make. It's such a beautiful thing to see a person, a young person or an older person, manifest their intelligence. And it happens in all of these informal settings. And you think, wow, with the access to technology we have today, with all of the research that we've done around learning, we should be able to design something that can really capture um, intelligence outside of this heavily traditional and sociologically skewed model, which is the academic pathway. I'm like you. I've had a very academic background. I love academia, and I think that it's a gift to the world that it's there. But it's not the only way of being educated, and we don't have the resources to actually proliferate that system so that it can touch everybody the way that Sustainable Development Goal 4 wants it, high quality education for everybody. If we don't have enough teachers, and we don't have enough investment in education, that's another discussion, and I think that needs to happen. But I
Absolutely.
think, yeah, but we also need to change the way that we're assessing and redefine what quality education means. That's really
Absolutely.
what this book is on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we will get there, and partially we discussed this. I believe the fact that you are lighting that school grading often reflects social advantage is already an important statement, because it directly speaks to the real meaning of assessment. And in relation to this, there is a third theme, another important one, a core one, in reading your book that I highlighted is human flourishing beyond tests. The problem you write, again, is probably not a direct quote, but at least my notes. The problem with assessment in schools is not that it's focused on the construct of academic knowledge and the skills associated with academic knowledge. The problem is that it is essentially only focused on the construct of academic knowledge and those skills specifically associated with academic knowledge. And so the book speaks of human competencies as and broader forms of success that current assessment fail to recognize. So, what are some of these undervalued competencies? I like to call them also values, dispositions, referring to the work that UNESCO is doing, and how schools and universities can begin to nurture and evaluate such dispositions, or what you define as undervalued competencies. How can schools and universities begin to move toward this direction and nurture and evaluate such competencies or dispositions?
Lifelong learning, not learning in a transactional way to get the best possible score, maybe forgetting what you've learned and moving on, but actually building up the fitness, the muscle to want to keep learning throughout your life. And that's curiosity, criticality, engagement. Um, that's something that schools obviously try to develop. But if we're going to assess it, then we need to recognize when students are really leaving their passion. There are assessments out there that do it, passion projects. In the IB middle years program, you've got something called the personal project. These are moments where students can showcase their passion. And I think schools should be places where you allow passions to fly. And if children are really latching onto something, that they can go deeper, um, which means, there's part of the book is on timetabling as well, because everything's interconnected. This gridiron, rectilinear approach that we have, the architecture of learning, which is really sort of boxed in. It's not only in assessments, examinations, tests, grade distribution. It's even in the way that the curriculum's chopped up in a week and in a year. And if we could allow students to go further in some instances and to accelerate in others. So using some of the principles of gifted education and differentiation to really be more flexible, I think that would be good. Then another one, it's self-agency. Okay, so that's entrepreneurship, thinking on your feet. It's understanding rights and responsibilities. It's being somehow accountable for your ideas, and that implies real world projects. That implies giving students more freedom to take some decisions, and it might be in the form of prototypes or kind of mini simulations of the world of work. Something that we started at the International School of Geneva. It's the Model United Nations system. We call it the Student League of Nations. I love that because there's quite a lot of student autonomy. They are putting themselves in situations of responsibility. They're representing a country while they learn these skills. So there's another example. Then you've got the whole range of types of interaction, the way that you interact with other people. Let's just focus on that. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but this is a really important one. We know that what defines success to a large extent in the workplace and in social networks, it's how well you can get on with other people. It's being a good listener. It's sometimes knowing how to follow, knowing how to lead. It's turning up on time. That's really important. We certainly don't assess that, and we don't really nurture it as we get towards the end of high school. It actually becomes quite siloed, and there's a lot of competition. Students at the end of the day, they're in an individualistic pathway, and they're actually competing against one another, which is really sad. And so you get into this all sort of, what grade did you get, and what grade did he get, and what grade did she get, and parents are saying, "Oh, my son got this score, and I'm going to this university." It's breaking down what we should be working on, which, going back to the Delors Report, is learning to live together. So the way that you develop that, it's by having assessments that really bring out teamwork and conflict resolution. Philosophy for Children is a great program that does that. A lot of this work has been around for a while, all the way back to the 60s, but it's on the fringes. It's on the fringes of what's happening in most schools, and we need to bring it to the center so that this academic stronghold is just loosened up a little bit, and some of those other types of skills can sit alongside them. The last thing I'd say, Emiliano, is I'm a big believer in the arts and sports. My own children are high-performing sports people, and I myself, I love the arts. And when you see a student in a school play, and you think of the hours and hours of work they've put into memorizing their lines, just for 2 or 3 performances, or when you see, I don't know, a school concert, and the effort, the dedication, the passion, the skill, the mastery that goes into a performance. Or when you see, a school team at sports day or in a sports competition performing, what you're viewing there, it's I think as important as how well you can do in a history test or a math test or a science experiment. And yet we don't really value it. It doesn't count for anything. It's just sort of on the side. So those things need to be valued, and they need to be nurtured just as much as academic skills.
Absolutely. And as we head towards the end of this very interesting conversation, there is another core theme I'd like to discuss with you. You write that the situation has become chronic. The end of school assessment must change. So, what kind of systemic shifts in curriculum, pedagogy, and policy are needed, in your opinion, to move beyond the current assessment paradigm? You're talking about narrowness of the curriculum, the prevalence of certain subjects in the curriculum, ignoring extracurricular and home activities. Human competencies that are extremely important for human flourishing and success in the broader sense of the term are not formally recognized as assessments. So, what are the implications? And I do like the situation has become chronic and the end of school assessment must change. This call for a systemic change is very interesting to me, but I'd like to learn more. And I'm confident that our audience also wants to learn more about this call for change that you are advocating for in this last book.
You take COVID. So COVID was this opportunity to rethink everything. And we all promised ourselves that we would do things differently after COVID. The examination system imploded. A lot of universities went test optional. Schools were exploring different ways of living and learning together. I mean, it was obviously difficult. It was a pandemic, but it showed us how fragile this model of assessment that we've designed is. And what happened, in fact, is nothing. We went back to normal. All the earlier grade boundaries were put back in place. The exact same educational assessment system was put in place. All those universities that had gone test optional, now they've gone back to placement tests. And in fact, there's more competition, and it's even more stressful for students than it was before. And worse than that, it's as if we've forgotten that COVID was there, and the dent it's created in the learning of a number of students who are going through these assessment regimes, is that they're carrying that with them. So that's why it's become chronic. It's actually getting worse, I think. And yet, there are these pockets of revolution. There are these resistance movements. I started one of them. It's called the Coalition to Honor All Learning. I got together a group of 50 schools and some universities to explore alternative assessment models.
Interesting.
And what we're looking at, there are quite a few things out there. Holo Tracker, which is in Singapore, it's a way of every time you see a student competence coming up, you dial it in, and it creates these cluster graphs, sort of showing where students' performance is over time. There's something called the Mastery Transcript Consortium in the United States, which is a competence-based model. There's our own model at the International School of Geneva called the Learner Passport, where we're allowing students to really gain competence recognition in non-academic and academic areas, and it's represented in the circle, this donut showing more or less of different competences. There's the Global Citizenship Diploma, which is done.
We discussed this last time.
We discussed that last time. There's also something called the Systems Transformation Pathway that the International Baccalaureate is piloting with a few schools. And in Los Angeles, we'll be looking at how we can contribute to this, because I think ground up, schools need to make the change, because universities, it's difficult for universities to do it. It's very politicized, what universities recognize. But if more and more schools start to come together and say, no, we're going to start, changing the way that we assess students, and we want you to recognize this, I think change will come that way.
Bottom up, yeah.
I think bottom up, because top down is it's really tricky. And that's a whole other discussion. And in fact, there's a chapter on it in the book. I think it's chapter 6. It's on universities. And
let's show the book to our audience. I guess that's the one you have on your desk.
Yeah. Here's the book. The good thing about this book is it's, well, a couple of good things. One is it's not too long. So it's not like a 500-page book. You can read this. Yeah, you can spend a couple of days at the beach and get through it. Another thing about it is it's open access. It's free.
Open access, yes.
Yeah, so it came out with UNESCO's International Bureau of Education and with Brill, who are a great publisher out of the Netherlands and the US. And it's open access. It's free. Yeah. So anyone can read it.
Yeah, and we will include the cover and the link in the video once it's edited, so that everyone can access and read it, because I think this is a very, very important theme that you are discussing in terms of changing assessment. And in concluding our conversation, I want to ask you, as you know, the podcast develops a variety of discussions around global citizenship education. We already discussed many of your interesting ideas in the previous discussion. For this discussion, since assessment is a big theme in global citizenship education, I want you to, if possible, share with our audience two or three key areas or elements, or let's call it principles or even values that you believe are core for a type of assessment that would encourage human flourishing.
That's such an interesting question because it depends from where you're looking at the problem. Is it as a, someone on a curriculum board who's in curriculum design? Is it as a student? Is it as a parent? Is it as an administrator, as a teacher? But I would say, no matter what you're doing, it's first and foremost a mindset, or if you prefer, attitude or dispositional challenge. And I think it's the same for global citizenship, really. It's opening up your mind to a much richer appreciation of human potential, whether that's formally or informally. And that takes personal work. It takes curiosity, listening, and learning. Humans have wonderful gifts, and we should recognize them. I think the second, it's systems and processes, that operationalize some kind of change, and that change can happen at different levels. At a sort of macro level, if you're involved in assessment design, or you're in a Ministry of Education, or you're working with a non-governmental organization, an examination board, use the power that you have to broaden assessment, even if it's just a few assessment items. Be more explorative and creative. Bring more people in through the assessment model that you create. If you're a parent or a teacher or an administrator, encourage your students, and maybe even encourage yourself to explore life from several different angles, and to enjoy yourself as well. Um, it's sad to look at education as being boxed up in a classroom and preparing for tests. Get outside, um, watch a movie, read a book, try a different meal. I mean, it sounds trivial what I'm saying, but I think at the core of it, it's this idea of diversity in the broadest possible sense in experience um, and life. And then maybe the last one, it's connection. So you can't work in isolation.
Connection.
I'm glad you've invited me to this podcast. I follow your work, and you've created a real impact. But
Thank you.
we have to help each other and diffuse each other's work, so that we're doing this together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Connection, very important, along with dialogues, I believe, because nowadays it's easy to feel isolated, particularly when you're
Mm-hmm.
advancing a pioneeristic type of work in education. Thank you very much, Conrad Hughes, the Director General of the International School of Geneva, and many other positions that reflects the preciousness of the work you're doing. I want to close by reading again that important, impressive, and core passage that you shared with me in our email exchanges previous to this podcast. Schools should not only be places where we learn to be and learn to live together, but also places where assessment practices valorize each diverse range of human gifts within each learner. And yet, most schools remain locked in a 19th century assessment structure that prevents young people from exploring the full variety and extent of their talents, forcing them to perform on a narrow, high stakes track. When will this change? Thank you so much, Conrad, for joining the Global Citizenship Education Interview Series. This was a very, very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Emilia.